Welcome and good evening. I'm Lisa Picker with Carroll County Public Library, and I thank you for joining us for what is sure to be a wonderful event. Tonight, returning author Angie Kim will be interviewed by Carroll's own reader of readers, Ted Zaleski. We'd like to thank our partners who make the streaming of this event possible at the Community Media Center. They are helping to keep us all connected while we are apart. I'd also like to encourage you to support A Likely Story Books, a woman-owned business right here in downtown Sykesville. Debbie's store is truly one of the best bookstores in the country, and all of you should go visit her. Angie Kim is the author of the national bestseller, Miracle Creek. Named a Best Book of the Year by Time, The Washington Post, Kirkus, Real Simple, Library Journal, The Today Show, Amazon, and Hudson Booksellers, and a Good Morning America Hot Summer Read. Oh, and she also just won a little thing called an Edgar Award for Best First Novel. Kim is one of Variety Magazine's 10 storytellers to watch and has written for Vogue, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Glamour, Salon, and Slate. She moved from Seoul, Korea to Baltimore as a preteen and attended Stanford University and Harvard Law School, where she was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. A former trial lawyer, she now lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and her 3 sons. She's at work on her next novel, which, if we may plead with her, she might even tell us about. We were delighted to have her at last year's Day for Book Lovers, and we expect even greater things for her in the future. Angie will be interviewed by Ted Zaleski, an avid reader, our good friend, and the Director of Management and Budget for the county. I will say, I think he would easily drop that and do this for a living if he could. Be sure to ask any questions on our Facebook Live feed in the comments, and we'll get to those as we can. And now, Angie Kim.
Hi, how is everyone doing? I hope that everyone's able to see me. I've had to call in separately, so hopefully you're not just seeing this phone icon over there. But in any case, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Ted. A Day for Book Lovers last year was, I think, one of my favorite events that I did, and it was an amazing experience, and I loved meeting so many people. And a Likely Story is such a wonderful bookstore, so thank you so much for supporting my work. I really appreciate it. Ted, would you like me to just give a quick intro of the book and then we can dive right into the questions?
Yes, please do.
Okay, excellent. So I wanted to say a little bit about Miracle Creek for those of you who haven't read the book or know what it's about. So Miracle Creek is my debut novel. And and it says from Lisa Picker, should I merge Angie's video and audio? Yes, please, that would be awesome. And if that's not possible, I can take 20 seconds and just redial in so that I can do that. So just let me know by chat. In any case, I just wanted to say that Miracle Creek is my debut novel, and it's a literary courtroom drama about a Korean immigrant family and a young single mother who's on trial for murdering her 8-year-old son on the autism spectrum. Miracle Creek, the title, refers to the name of the fictional Virginia town, the rural town where the Yu family, the Korean immigrant family, resides. And they have a business called Miracle Submarine, which is not a real submarine. It is a hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber, which is a real thing. And it's an experimental therapy to deliver high pressurized oxygen to people. And what's happening is that, sorry, I'm a little distracted by the chat, but in any case, in the beginning of the novel, this group oxygen chamber explodes and there's an uncontrollable fire. and several patients who are inside who are doing this HBOT experimental therapy for things ranging from infertility and autism to cerebral palsy and Lyme disease, are caught in the chamber, sealed in this fire, and several people die. And we immediately fast forward a year to the murder trial, where the police have accused the mother of one of the kids who has died of setting this fire on purpose in order to be rid of the burdens of taking care of her child. And so in one sense, it is a whodunit, a why done it, a how done it. It's a murder mystery of sorts where we try to act as the jurors and we try to figure out who actually started the fire and why and how. But more than that, it's a deep dive into the lives of these people, the people who are the immigrant families who have settled in this rural, isolated community where they feel unwelcome and where they feel insecure because they don't speak the language, as well as the lives of these patients, the special needs community, and how they really need to depend on each other in order to sort of make it from day to day. So that's sort of the novel in a nutshell.
All right. Thanks, Angie. Okay,
Absolutely.
So we're going to dive into Miracle Creek here. This is Miracle Creek. This is my working copy. You see, I've been spending a little time thinking about this. So I have a lot of things to talk about here. I was talking earlier, said I wish we had 2 hours to go through this. So first, book structure, just something that caught my eye. I think the first chapter, the incident, is the only one that's first person. And also young you is the first chapter, and the second chapter of the book belong to her. Was there any intent there, or is it just something that happened?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit of both. So young you, and I have, I think, managed to merge the video and audio together. So hopefully it's a little bit better. So thanks for being patient with me, everyone. And sorry for the technical issues. It's entirely my fault. So sorry about that. In any case, yeah. So the close third person is sort of my favorite writing technique. I really love sort of getting inside somebody's head by using a very, very close perspective. It's almost like the camera, if you can imagine a movie or a TV show or something, the camera like almost goes into the person's head, almost like a first person, except that you're using the he and she pronouns to give just a tiny bit of distance. So I really like that for short stories and for writing in general. And for the first person, though, which acts as a prologue. So I wanted to do it as a first person, which is different from everything else in the book for two reasons. One is I wanted to sort of give an indication that this was a little bit different from the rest of the novel. So the rest of the novel takes place really over the 4-day trial that occurs a year after the explosion. Whereas this is happening on the night of the explosion. It's the incident. It's the night when everything began. And so I wanted to give a little bit of a sense of urgency for that. And in order to do that, I wanted to have the intensity and the intimacy that I think the I voice gives. And then the second reason is that I wanted to give the readers a hint that out of the 7 characters who speak to us throughout the novel. So there are 7 point of view characters that speak to us, chapter by chapter. That Young, who opens and closes the novel, is sort of the one that we should pay attention to. She's sort of our main protagonist, if you will. And so pay attention to her. She's going to give you a lot of guidance throughout this mystery. She's going to be the character that you're going to sort of be interested in following as far as her journey is concerned and her arc, and give her a chance to sort of tell you a little bit more about her life and her perspectives. And she's going to give you lots of clues. And then I said that there were two reasons, but I lied. There's a third reason, which is sort of a kind of a silly reason in a way. So the first line of the book is, "My husband asked me to lie," and it really, when I thought of it, which that wasn't always the first line of the book, but when I sort of thought of it, I think it was like towards the end of the novel, when I had sort of figured out what the novel was about, because I didn't really plot it out beforehand. And I think writing the first draft is a process of discovery. And when I sort of came upon that line, I just thought, I want to keep that line. That is a great first line for my novel, because the novel is so much about secrets and lies and being told to lie by other people, and whether you follow that or not, and whether you decide to tell the truth regardless of what it costs you and your family. And so I thought that was a great first line that I wanted to keep. And, her husband asked her to lie just doesn't have the same ring as my husband asked me to lie. So I just sort of thought, okay, I wrote it in first person. I was thinking about maybe changing it to third, but I really can't now because I just love that first line too much.
Okay, I can see that. You said a couple things there that I try to touch on. You talked about Young and how you saw her as part of the book. And definitely as I was reading it, I was having thoughts about, she's not the person kind of making things happen, but it got hard to see the book without her. She was the one that kind of touched everything. Yeah. And now I want to come back to the lies in just a second. Now,
sure.
When you talked about the close third person and getting into people's minds, that actually leads right into the second thing I wanted to talk about. What I wrote down was a lot of the book takes place in people's minds. And I was thinking about the book Crime and Punishment as I was reading this. And it was funny, about halfway through the book, Crime and Punishment comes up. If we have time, I want to go back to that again. But can you talk a little bit about this idea of how much of the book is not people doing something, but people thinking about things?
Absolutely. I really think that, to me, my favorite stories and my favorite writings are ones that explore the interior life of a character or several characters, rather than sort of, say this happened and then that happened and then that happened. I mean, not that that's not fun, because that can be so fun. But I think that that's one of the things that makes a novel or a book stand out, that makes it so different from sort of a movie or a TV show in so many ways. Of course, like with amazing actors, we can get so many clues into what's going on inside a person's mind, just from a facial expression, of course. So I'm not saying that can't happen, but I do think that there's something special about using the written word to really explore what a person's thinking. And I think that one of the reasons why that's so interesting to me is because, and this sort of feeds into the secrets and lies, is that I think shame is something that I'm really interested in as far as exploring what people think. And I think shame, just because I feel like there's so many things that people think throughout the day, and that's just that they keep hidden inside them, that they are so afraid to expose to anyone, even their spouse or their loved ones or their closest friends. There are just some things that you just don't want anyone to know that you thought, and you're even ashamed of it from yourself. You don't even want, like, you think something and you are horrified by yourself, and you sort of think, I can't believe that I thought that, and I am just going to bat that away and pretend, even to myself, that I've never even had such a thing. I think we all have that as human beings. It's sort of part of being human, but I think that we don't really talk about it. And so I think that's where literature can really come and, and give you and give you, an idea that is something that you can explore, that we should know about each other, because that says so much about humanity. And like, for example, in this novel, there are some scenes where some mothers are thinking some horrific things about their kids and the burdens that they have about their lives. And it really goes against this myth that we have as a society, the myth of the saintly mother, the myth of the good mother, capital G, capital M. And I think that's so interesting to me, because I've had some of those thoughts. And I think that many of my friends have had similar thoughts, but we don't really like to talk about it. And so I think it makes all of us feel like we're sort of monsters for having even these momentary, thoughts that we're ashamed of. And I think the more we can expose those to light, the more we can sort of get to an understanding, and the more we can sort of have empathy for each other. And I think that's what, novels for me are good for. Other than just sort of saying, hey, here's something fun that happened, and this happened, and then that happened, and then some other thing happened,
So did any of your friends read the book and then feel like they were better able to say something?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's been one of the fun things about doing book clubs and things like that, where when I attend book clubs, I actually encourage everyone to please tell me sort of what they thought. And instead of just asking me questions and me sort of, talking, I like to sort of be a fly in the wall as well, and, sort of discuss things as equals among other people. And that's one thing that I've heard a lot, is people saying, these parents are parents in extraordinary circumstances in Miracle Creek. They are parents dealing with, immigration. So being in a land where they don't speak the language, where the culture is really foreign to them. They are special needs parents, where they are dealing with their children and having to care for them 24/7, and being envious of other people who have easier, more quote unquote normal lives. All of that sort of stuff. But then I've heard from a lot of parents, a lot of mothers saying, it's not just that. It's not just, I'm a normal, quote unquote, normal mother with typical children, American in an American land. And yet I have those moments too. And so I've heard a lot of these sort of confessionals going around each other. And that's been one of the most heartening things that I've gone through in this past year. I think I've done something like, I've participated in like 120 book clubs or something in the last year or so. And that's been a consistent theme that's come up, and that's made it really rewarding for me to sit in on.
Yeah, I can see it'd be a good feeling to know that your book has touched people in that personal way.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you mentioned lies in your opening line. My husband asked me to lie. Now, this book is full of lies and liars. Another structural thing I noticed, and again, just wondering if this was part of your plan for how to deliver the book, or if it just emerged from the story. I was looking in the first 100 pages, and I might have gotten these counts wrong, but they should be close. There were 4 pages referenced lies. In the second 100 pages, there were 6. And in the third 100, it was 11. And in the last 50 pages, there were 7. So the pace of lying really picked up. So was that you trying to lead the story, or was that just something that kind of fell out of what was going on?
I think I didn't do it that way on purpose. I think I'm an organic writer. I don't plot things out beforehand as much, although I'm trying to do that for my second novel more. And I am more sort of somebody who tries to get inside the head of whichever character is the point of view character for that particular chapter that I'm working on. And then, really try to think, how would this character respond to whatever's happening and whatever has happened, in the previous chapter. So it's more of like a method writing, like sort of like method acting, but, for writing. That's how I sort of like to approach the writing. So given that, I think it just meant that when we got to part 3, which had the highest lie count, people were really feeling more threatened. And and that's where all the revelations came, even some of the flashbacks to those really pivotal moments where they really felt like, okay, this is a very important, crucial thing that happened to me around the time of the fire, and exploring what that meant and why it was important to them. And I think in those moments, people can tend to lie more. And I think in my book in particular, the lying and their ties to shame really has a lot to do with the culture of the Korean culture and the special needs community as well, in the sense that I think shame is a huge concept in the Korean culture. I think because of the sense of like family honor and, making sure that your family looks good to other people and holding up, your face, and those types of concepts that are very, very important to the Korean culture. I think because of that, this concept of lying takes on a special significance. And in times of stress and in times when there's bad things happening and things that you're ashamed of and you feel guilty about or embarrassed about, I think the sort of lies get accelerated and, they sort of intensify and roll on. And I think it may be a similar thing that happens in the special needs community, in the sense that there's just so much stuff that's happening on a day-to-day basis. And I've talked a little bit in the novel about some of the challenges that the characters face with respect to, fecal smearing and, just some of the repetitive behaviors that are injurious, like self-injurious headbanging and all of those things. And I think that can also lead to a sense of embarrassment and a sense that you want to try to sort of protect your family and protect your child and yourself from the judgment of others by not talking about it and trying to hide away some of those types of things. And so I think all of those things combined together with the pressure of the murder trial and the sense of like, they're closing in on the fact. I think all of those sort of combine together into like a perfect storm. And so then there's like lies upon lies upon lies that are happening. Yeah.
Now, you were very influenced by a book called Mystic River by Dennis Lahaye.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad that you are bringing this up. I love that.
I was going to make a couple comments, ask you one very specific question, but then let you say what you would like to about your experience with that book. First, I want to tell people who are listening, if you are interested enough in Angie to listen to this or watch this, you should be interested enough to check out an article Angie wrote called How Mysterious. Very, very interesting article, very, very useful in understanding some of the things that she's done. And there was something you talked about there that reminded me of another interview I did. And actually, you mentioned Laura Lipman as another writer that you've been influenced by. I interviewed Laura on her book Sunburn. And kind of like, your different perspectives, she had a handful of characters who kept changing from chapter to
Mm-hmm.
chapter. And I was talking to her some about that, and she got very excited and said, yeah, let me tell you about that. I assigned each of those characters a color, and I laid out my chapters by color, and I thought it should be visually appealing to me. And then she said, and my nephew plays the guitar, and I gave each one a note and had him play the book to me. The thing that you talked about that reminded me of that, you said that you downloaded the audio Mystic River, and you were listening to it while you were brushing your teeth and combing your hair. And you said something like, letting the rhythm and cadence seep into me.
Absolutely. Oh, that's good. I love that.
Then the question I had, and then you can talk about this some. It was just at 2:30 today. I actually looked at the clock when I had this thought. It said Mystic River, Miracle Creek. Is your title an homage to Mystic River?
Absolutely. Yes, completely. It's so. Oh, yes, absolutely. I love that. I love that you're bringing this up. This is great.
Okay, go to
Okay, so first of all, what I was saying that I love so much is I just love that you talked to Laura and that she had these colors and whatever. So I also do the same thing. I assigned colors to the characters, and so even though I didn't outline first, as I said, once I was done with my first draft, I sort of did this very comprehensive outline and chronologies and charts and analyses of what I had written to try to figure it out and try to figure out how to tighten, reorganize, and all of that sort of stuff. And when I was doing that, I assigned all the characters colors. So everything was color coded by character. So, for example, Elizabeth, the mother who's on trial, was black, and Young was yellow, and Matt was a dark blue, and Pac was a light blue, and so on and so forth. So anyway, so I love that. So I'm so glad that you told me that about Laura, because I think I've said this numerous times, but Laura Lipman, in addition to sort of being very Baltimore centric, which I love because I came to Baltimore as an 11-year-old from Seoul. And so I have my heart and my roots there. I think Laura is the only author about whom I can say this following thing, which is she has something like 23 novels. I can't think of any other author where I have read all of their novels and loved, not just enjoyed or liked, but loved all of them. There are so many authors that I love, and and if they have that many books, there's one book or two that I'm just like, that wasn't as, it was just not my cup of tea. But she's just consistently, I just love everything she's written. So in any case, about Mystic River, yes, that's why I named my town Miracle Creek. I did want to call the submarine Miracle Submarine, the hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber. It looks sort of like a mini submarine. And I like the idea that it's a miracle, that the parents are hoping for a miracle, that they're desperate for a miracle. And so I wanted to use that. And then I just thought of, this creek running through this town where everything is sort of happening. And through the woods and cutting through and meandering. And in fact, my book was originally called Miracle Submarine, but some booksellers sort of objected to that, saying that they thought the title, including the word submarine in the title, might give people the wrong impression and make people think that it's a sci-fi novel or a military thriller or something. So they said, let's change it. And, and that was sad for me in a way, because I loved Miracle Submarine as title, because to me, that's like another character in the novel. It's sort of the central character throughout. But at the same time, I did think, now I can actually highlight Miracle Creek and call it Miracle Creek, which I sort of wondered if people might think was too close to Mystic River. And as far as, but it was definitely a titular homage to that. And I also loved the structure and the way that there was tragedy, but also a sense of sort of impending, like just solving the mystery. But then even after the mystery is solved, there's just so much fallout from that, which is present in Mystic River. And so I really love that as well. And so I tried to follow the sort of plot line to the extent that I could. And that sort of sense of, yes, we're trying to solve the mystery, but even after we get there, there's still other stuff that is tragic that can happen from that. And like I said, I did love the voice that the different voices that he gave to the various characters. He also had something like 8 POV, point of view characters throughout the novel. And so I really was happy that I could sort of do a similar thing. And I love the grit of the voices, and I listen to the audiobooks all the time. There were actually 2 different audiobooks versions with 2 different narrators, and I loved both of them. So I sort of like went back and forth whenever I got bored.
Can you talk a little bit about how you created your own master course to teach you how to write a book using Mystic River?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I love that you read this article and that it spoke to you. So I, one of the things that I was saying is I don't have an MFA in writing. I'm relatively new to creative writing. I started writing about 10 years ago or something like that, 10 years ago. And especially fiction. And I started with literary short stories. So I don't have that much experience actually, writing mysteries to begin with. And I definitely don't have any experience even attempting a novel. And so, I mean, I read like every how to write a novel book that there probably is. But on top of that, the thing that I found most valuable is taking that novel, Dennis Lahaye's Mystic River, and just sort of outlining it and analyzing it and deconstructing it. I have so many different documents that are also color coded, where I sort of say, from pages, 54 to 73, this character takes over in third person and reveals this key plot point, and, that type of thing. So I have all these Excel spreadsheets that are color coded by character, and sort of saying at what percentage point in the novel did this particular plot point take place, and trying to sort of deconstruct that novel so that I could sort of say, okay, for this novel that really spoke to me and that really worked for me, this is how the skeleton of the novel laid out, and trying to sort of see how mine compared to that, my first draft compared to that, and seeing how I could maybe make my beginning a little bit shorter to sort of more imitate the structure that he had in getting us into the story faster, for example. So that kind of a master. So I called it my master class that I taught myself using Mystic River. So, those are the kinds of things that you have to do when you don't know how to write, how to do something, right? Like, and as a debut novelist, I didn't know anything. So that was what I had to do. And I'm so glad that I picked the right book.
Yeah. I've never read it, but now it's on my list of things to get to.
Oh, you have to read it. It's a great book, and it's also a great movie. The movie is amazing. It's got Sean Penn, and it's wonderful.
I was going to read one little bit from your article. I thought it was really, really interesting. You're talking about Mystic River, and you say a contemporary twist on the classic whodunit with an inventive structure with a half dozen narrative voices weaving around each other, flashbacks and flash forwards intertwined with the present day murder investigation to give us not only the clues to the mystery, but a searingly intimate examination of the interior lives of the people affected. I read that and I had to stop and look. Okay, wait a second. Is she talking about her book or is she talking about Mystic River?
Right. Oh, thank you. That's so wonderful of you to say. That was exactly what I wanted to accomplish, was what I thought he did so well. And I think Laura Lipman does like amazingly well in her novels too. It's that I think my attention span is not great, and my memory for names and things like that is not great. So I have a hard time with reading unless I get hooked really easily. And so I really like having that mystery to sort of hook me in as a reader, and then sort of keep me going along. But what helps me with some mysteries, I feel like I read it and then a couple days later, I can't even remember what it was about. I remember that I enjoyed it and it was fun to read, but I could not tell you what it was about or like why I thought it was particularly good. It was just fun, in the same way that, a fun summer movie can be. And I think for me anyway, what I really love and the things that I love in books are the things, like I talked about before, the interior moments where characters say something. And I just think that is so right. And I hadn't quite thought of it that way before, or I had thought of it that way, but I couldn't ever articulate it in the same way that this character is saying it. And it just means so much to me. And I think we've all had those moments when you're reading along and you just sort of stop. And on the one hand, you want to keep going because you're so invested in the moment and in that world and that character, and you want to keep on hearing what they're saying, and you want to keep going and you want to read really, really quickly so that you can find out what happened. On the one hand, you just want to stop and you just want to think about it and you just want to savor it. And you want to savor those words and that insight to whatever that insight that character has that they're telling you about. And I think that combination is sort of my own personal sweet spot of the things that I love to read. And so that was what I was hoping to create. So I'm really happy to hear that you thought that.
Yep, success.
Great.
Okay. We've mentioned young Yu, then her husband, Pak, the owner and operator of the Miracle Submarine, and then they have a daughter, Mary. The relationship between those three is pretty central to the book. And in some ways, particularly the relationship between Young and Mary. Just wanted to mention a couple things and then have you talk some about it. There's one comment that Young makes that I thought was really important. She's complaining about Mary not helping out with things. And Pak says, "We didn't give up everything and come to America so she can cook and clean." And she thinks, "No, that's my job, I want to say, but I never do." It's like, okay, we gave everything up and I'm still doing this, but she doesn't have to. And then there's a point where Mary says, speaking of her mother, and she hated her for being her mother, for bringing her to a place that made her hate her mother. And putting aside those thoughts, the thing that really stood out to me is it wasn't Young's decision at all. She didn't bring Mary to America, yet she's getting beaten up for doing it. And then there's places where there's one scene where the three of them are holding hands and Young is talking about feeling, even though it's a circle, feeling like she's outside the circle. And then another place where you talk about equilateral triangles and them not really existing. So I was just wondering if you could talk about Young and Mary and some of those ideas.
Absolutely. So Miracle Creek being my debut novel, I did definitely take the liberties and, take a lot of elements from my own life and put them into the novel, which I think does happen quite a bit with first novels, just because there's so many things that you've been thinking and obsessing about your entire life, and you just want to make sure that you actually get to say it. So I think that does happen a lot. And in my case, one of the fundamental things about this novel that really comes from my own life is this family, the Yu family, and their relationship. The Yu family is basically my family, my own family. And Mary Yu, the daughter, is basically me as a teenager or preteen. We have the same background as the Yu family. My parents and I came, I'm an only child, and my parents and I came from Korea to the Baltimore area when I was 11. We were really poor in both places, and my parents had a little tiny grocery store in downtown Baltimore, a very dangerous neighborhood. So I stayed with another family with my aunt and uncle and my cousin. And so I was very resentful. And some of those lines that you read are actually taken almost straight from some essays that I had written about that time in my life. And I think there's a lot of that sort of mother-daughter resentment, which really in their case, Mary and Young's case, and in mine as with my mother as well, come from the fact that we were so close in Korea. It was just the two of us. My dad was working a lot, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So we were always together, and we were so, so close. And then all of a sudden coming to a land where you feel displaced anyway, and you don't speak the language, your parents don't speak the language, and you see them struggling. So then all of a sudden you are in a position of feeling like your parents are no longer the heroes that you thought that they were. They're not sort of the giants that children, I think of their parents as. So there's that sort of coming of age moment as well. And I think when I make this point, Mary makes this point a lot, and Young does too, is this: when you have three people, I think one way that daughters can really, and not just daughters, all children can really hurt one parent or another to punish them, is by sort of picking one side or the other. And I think parents can do the same thing. Parents can sort of do that in families with siblings by sort of picking one sibling over another, in some ways. And I think these are sort of human failings that we all have. And I think those were sort of the things that in this particular family and in my own family got really magnified because of the intensity of that experience of moving from one place to a place that is, halfway around the world, different looking people, different culture, different clothes, different language, different expectations, different everything. And I think that's what I tried to bring out. And it's something that has been, I think, hard, but rewarding for my parents and me to sort of go through together, as far as them reading this work and then, and then commenting on it and sort of realizing what parts of our own family's experiences are reflected in that.
There's another important Mary Young moment, I think. Mary says, you have a voice, why can't you use it? It's funny, when I was making notes in this, I initially wrote it down as, why don't you use it? And something made me stop. And I said, wait a second, no, that's not what she wrote. She wrote can't. So I'm interested in you talking about what you did write, and also wondering, did you ever give any thought to can't versus don't there?
I think we definitely did. That's probably one of those words that I went back and forth. There are certain passages that I can tell you exactly when it was and what was happening, whether it was sunny or rainy that day. And that's one of those phrases. There are certain places where it might be a comma that I decide, that I go back for 2 hours back and forth on, should that be a comma or semicolon or no comma at all, or should that be an em dash? I mean, these are the things that I do. I drive myself crazy. And that is one of those things that I was like, is it a don't or a can't? And what does that imply about the character? So I think that that's so wonderful that you actually picked up on that, because I think that's the first time anybody has asked me about that particular sentence. And I did go back and forth, and, you know, and I think it was more the cadence of it to me that it just, the hard k, the can't, seemed harsher, and I wanted that to be harsh. I wanted her to be punishing her mother. I wanted, when Young hears that, to feel like a stab, like, you know, like something is stabbing her. And I feel like the can't is a much harsher word phonetically and sound-wise than don't. So I thought that that was more important than any difference in meaning, which you could sort of quibble and go back and forth with. And I think that moment is also really important to me, because Mary in that moment was expressing what I was feeling myself, which was frustration with Young as the character. Even though Young was I thought Young would be my main character, and that's why I started, you know, the novel with that. And but I didn't like Young in the beginning of the novel. She really frustrated me, and it's so funny because I say this to book clubs, and they laugh because I say, you know, there's another character named Matt, whom a lot of people end up hating by the end because he does something sort of despicable, not sort of, awful, and just absolutely despicable at the end. It's not really a spoiler, but because you don't know what it is. But you know, Matt, I think you can evolve, and you as the writer can sort of have insights into the characters that don't fully crystallize until sort of midway through. So in the beginning of the novel, I was really getting so annoyed with Young, even though she was my main character, because she was so voiceless. She was so helpless. She was so passive, and she was not standing up for herself. She was sort of like listening to what her husband was telling her and hiding her intellect and all the things that I really cannot stand about Korean women and the way that the Korean society treats women and makes women. I really feel very, very strongly about this. This is one of my like sort of life's obsessions, is the way that the Korean society and the patriarchal society sort of has that kind of impact on women. And so the fact that she was sort of acceding to it and being that sort of perfect Korean wife was really upsetting me and pissing me off and annoying me. And it wasn't until the end that she sort of, you know, I made my peace with her. But at that moment when Mary says that, I was just like so happy that I could give my own thoughts about how she was being and my frustration and annoyance with her, and have a character like Mary say that to her. It was a relief for me, you know, as the writer. And then on a like sort of converse of that, Matt, who is a character that I really liked in the beginning of the novel, and I thought he was sort of funny and, you know, sarcastic, and I felt sorry for him because some horrible things happened to him with a fire, and he, you know, gets injured and things like that. And so I think I liked him a lot, and I liked his voice. So I ended up giving him a lot of time and a lot of airtime. He has a lot of chapters, probably more than I think anybody except for Young. And then he sort of did a switch, and then by the end, I ended up despising him. So the two characters went like, you know, this for me. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you talked about Young and Matt there, and how much time you gave them.
Yeah.
Matt and Young, while you split it up among 7 people, did have by far the biggest shares of what was in the book. Now, talking about young, and you mentioned hiding away her intellect, which is a really good lead into something else I was going to ask you about.
Yeah.
Early in the book, you have an idea of who Young is, but then we learn some things later that, really not only change your mind, but, it's almost like, wow, I didn't think that. But, we find out later, that she was writing a master's thesis, talking about how Rawls, Kant, and Locke compared to Raskolnikov in the Crime and Punishment. I don't think anybody would have seen that coming. And then I guess kind of tied to this, Puck says something kind of interesting later in the book. He's mad at her and he says, this isn't one of your philosophy debates. So there are things to Young that we didn't see.
Definitely. I think that's so interesting that you say that you didn't think of her as a smart, intellectual woman. And part of that, of course, is just because she is so annoying in the beginning and not saying anything and hiding and sort of deferring so much to her husband. So of course you sort of assume that, you assume that he must be sort of the intellectual one and she's sort of the simpleton or whatever. But I also wonder if it's because she is, she doesn't speak English. And so, I mean, she does speak English, but she speaks English with syntax errors and, she uses simple words and she, when she's speaking in English to other people, she, it's clear that she has an accent. And just the grammar and syntax errors, I think, do give people the wrong assumption that she must not be very intelligent. And I think it's this, I have this whole thing about, it's one of my life's and, obsession, pet peeve type things, is this whole thing with equating how our society, and by our society, I don't mean the American society, I just mean like everybody, like the entire world, all human societies. I think we equate verbal fluency, especially oral fluency, with intelligence, and we equate the two. And because Young speaks English with, in a faltering way, and she has an accent and all that kind of stuff, that we just sort of assume that she must not be very intelligent. And I remember some of my writing group members, when they were reading early parts of this, they thought that she wasn't very intelligent. And then she said something really intelligent and really thought-provoking at some point. And they were like, I just don't buy this scene because she doesn't seem all that intelligent to me. I thought she was sort of a simpleton who hadn't been educated. And the way that she's talking, it's so thoughtful. It seems so out of character. And I had to sort of say, I think you think that it's out of character because you think of her as a simpleton because she speaks English with syntax errors. And they were like, wait, do I? Maybe we do. And we sort of thought through and we went through all of the character traits and all the moments. And there was really no reason why they would assume that she wasn't very intelligent except for that. And so it was sort of a big aha moment for me. And I thought, one of the things that I do have to do as an author is just to recognize that is a bias that I think readers are going to have, like every reader, because that's just so ingrained in our thought processes. And I knew that background about her. So I remember telling my writing group, I was like, but she has a master's, or she doesn't have a master's because she didn't finish her thesis, but I was going on and on and on about all the stuff that she had done. And they were like, okay, well, we don't know that. And I said, okay, well, I obviously have to make that more clear because I want people to know that you can be intelligent and speak with, not perfectly, and speak with an accent. And I want people to know that she herself feels a difference in IQ between when she's speaking in English versus Korean. And she talks about that in one sentence, that she says that she, when she's arguing with her daughter, she prefers to argue in Korean because otherwise, you know, her IQ like drops by half when she's speaking in English. And her daughter makes her feel so ashamed of that. And then I sort of thought, okay, I have to also make it clear that just because you're passive and being a good Korean woman, you know, by virtue of listening to your husband and being deferential, doesn't mean that you're not capable of thinking for yourself. It's that you've just been conditioned by culture not to do it. And so I needed to bring that out more. So it was a huge, huge thing for me. So I'm so glad that you talked about that. That's really important to me that people realize that. So I'm really glad that you have.
And on Pak, you did more directly address it. There's a spot in the book where you say Pak was a different person in English than he was in Korean. And then you go on to explain how he behaved in Korea versus how he behaves in the United States.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's something that a lot of immigrants have to deal with.
I'm going to take a wild right-hand turn here, go completely off what we've been on. Shannon Hogue, I thought, was a really interesting character. And
oh, good. I love her.
I was thinking, we know almost nothing about her. We know that her looks are deceptive. She has a black Mercedes, a very teenage daughter, and we see her in court. That's all we know. But I'm hoping that we will see her again. And you know, as I was thinking about her, I kept thinking that she reminded me of some other character, and it finally came to me. Harlan Coben has an attorney character named Hester Krumstein, and she kind of reminded me of her. And you know, not that they're the same character, just kind of made me think of it.
Right. Okay, cool. I'll have to look that up and read. I love Harlan Coben, so I'll have that, but I don't think I've read that book, so I'll have to do that.
Well, that's I ran across her. I did an interview with him in a book called Runaway, but I did recently read that he's actually put her in another book with a bigger role than she had there. I haven't read it.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Lisa, how are we doing?
We have a few questions from the audience if we'd like to work those in now.
Okay.
First, we have from Shauna, what was your inspiration for writing Miracle Creek?
Oh, what a great overview question. So I talked already a little bit about the foundational immigrant experience that I had. But like I said, this being my debut novel, I sort of jammed all of my life experiences into it. And so the other two things that are sort of woven in throughout the novel are, of course, my first career, which was being a trial lawyer. So I did love being in the trial setting, in courtrooms, although I have to admit and confess that I hated everything else about being a lawyer. But I did like the courtroom part, and so I put a lot of that, of course, in through the murder trial and things like that. And then the sort of last thing, and probably the most central thing, is the HBOT setting. So I have 3 boys, and all 3 are fine now, but they all went through sort of mysterious illnesses when they were babies and toddlers. Which was really, really difficult. And I think that's actually why I started writing, because I just felt the need to sort of unload all and decompress. And, you know, I needed a catharsis. And so writing provided that for me. So I started writing, you know, when sort of they had gone through everything and they were all fine. And I was sort of taking a look back on my life and sort of saying, okay, what has happened here? But one of the things that we went through with one of my kids was this HBOT thing, this experimental thing. So one of my kids was born deaf in one ear, and so had a lot of speech therapy and auditory processing therapy. And through that experience, I met this wonderful community in Northern Virginia, DC, Maryland area of mothers with children with developmental, concerns and special needs and things like that. We would like run into each other at the speech therapist's reading office all the time and sort of hang out together and things like that. And one of them told me when the same kid was 4, he developed ulcerative colitis. And it just wasn't responding to anything. So he was losing weight. He was throwing up. He was crying that it hurt every time he ate. And so it was heartbreaking, with a 4-year-old. And one of my friends that I had met through like the speech therapy and stuff like that had a child with autism. And she said that she was going to try this thing called HBOT, this group HBOT therapy. And she was going to try it for autism. And one of the things that she was, the articles that she had run across when she was researching it talked about how it was good for pediatric ulcerative colitis. And so she sent that to me. And so we decided to try it. And the first time we saw this group, HBOT chamber, it looked like a submarine. My son, who was 4, pointed to it. And he was like, look, it's a submarine, because we had just watched the Beatles' Yellow Submarine for family movie night. And it was just like that. It had like 4 portholes for the 4 patients who would go inside, just like the 4 Beatles for the Yellow Submarine, except that it was blue, painted blue rather than yellow. So it was our blue submarine. And during that experience that summer, I did, these hour-long dives every day, sometimes twice a day. And it's very similar to the setup in the novel. And it was just such an intense confessional atmosphere. It was this dark, sealed tube that you crawled into and you were sealed into with other people, and you sort of had nothing to do for an hour because you couldn't bring any electronics in, you couldn't bring anything in because of the fear of fire. And so you just sort of like talked about your life, and you compared and contrasted, and just the dynamics and the emotional intensity was so high. And I wasn't a writer at that time, but years later, when I did start writing and I thought about writing a novel, I immediately thought about this chamber, because I thought it's like a crucible. It's a crucible physically because you're sealed in, you can't get out. So what would happen if something, horrible like a fire were to break out? What would you do? So you start thinking of those things, but it's also an emotional crucible just because there's so many feelings swirling inside. The kids all have different abilities, all have different issues. And so just the comparisons back and forth, it was just very intense. So, and very intimate. So, yeah.
So the next question is from Marty. Are you working on another novel? And if so, what can you tell us about it?
Oh, yes. We had talked about how you were hoping that I would spoil a little bit. Not spoil, but so my next novel that I'm working on right now is called The Happiness Quotient. And it's about a 10-year-old boy in the DC area, so the same world as Miracle Creek, but in the present day. So about 10 years after Miracle Creek takes place. Miracle Creek takes place about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And the 10-year-old boy is nonverbal. He has apraxia and autism, and he goes on a walk with his father, who's the primary caregiver, and only the boy returns home. And because he's nonverbal, he can't tell the family or the authorities what happened. And his older siblings, who are fraternal twins, one boy, one girl, around 17, 18, become obsessed with using the new assistive communication therapies and techniques and technologies to try to help their little brother to find his voice and communicate. and help to solve the mystery of the father's disappearance. And so in that sense, we will get to see, I think, some of the characters. I can't promise anything, but I think we will. At the very end of Miracle Creek, there is a reference to something called Henry's House, which is a respite home for children. And I think that our 10-year-old boy goes there. So we will sort of run into Teresa, hear what's going on with her and Young, and we will also, I think, I'm not sure yet, but I think we will run into Shannon, the defense lawyer, again, because I think that when there's a missing person, it's going to be natural for the police to sort of want to get involved and question, you know, the parent, the spouse. I think that's sort of standard that happens. And so I think that probably Shannon's going to become involved because they're sort of in the same area geographically and with respect to sort of the autism world and all that kind of stuff.
Angie, when is this coming out in publication?
Oh, well, I have no idea whatsoever. I'm guessing several years from now.
Okay.
I'm a very slow writer, and so I'm taking my time and, you know, sort of getting to know the characters right now and starting to really hone down in the writing process. So unfortunately, I can't promise anything because I am such a slow writer.
But in the meantime, Miracle Creek did come out in paperback recently, right?
Yes. I was so excited. It came out in paperback. It's coming out in lots, I think something like 18 or 20 languages this year. And it's in development for to be turned into a mini series, like to a limited series. It's sort of like limited series, like what is it called? The Big Little Lies, like that type of thing. So,
well, that's very exciting. The next question we have is from David, and he asks, did you have this ending in mind when you started, or did you change your mind along the way?
I did not. Okay, so here's what I knew about the ending. I knew when I started that we would find out who did it. So, you know, there are some mysteries where you just never find out, and that's sort of one of these things. I did know that we would find out who did it. I wasn't sure exactly how, and I wasn't sure who, and I didn't know how it was going to come out, whether it was going to be like a confession or like some cool, you know, courtroom, you know, witness stand revelation, or I had no idea what it was going to be, but I did know that we were going to find out, but I did not know who it was. And so there were a lot of characters that I thought were good suspects, and I had in mind that it was probably one of them, but I wasn't completely sure. And I would say maybe about a year into the writing process, so maybe when I was about halfway through my first draft, I started getting more and more of a clear idea of who it could be, and sort of, you know, eliminating suspects sort of one by one. I think probably in a similar way that I hope that the readers do. You know, there are some red herrings in there right now, but I think the red herrings are not ones that I intentionally placed in there, but they're more sort of people that I thought could be, you know, the people who had done it. So they're more sort of natural, organic red herrings that sort of occurred to me. And the elimination sort of happened, I think, about the same time that I, as the writer, had the revelations as I went along.
You know, on people misinterpreting what they're reading, I definitely had a moment like that. I heard some things being said, and I said, oh, okay, I get it now, but I didn't get it.
Exactly. And I think that's what's fun, is that for me as the writer, I had the same moments. You know, there was a scene that I can think of very clearly. You probably know which one I'm thinking of, where I just thought, okay, the mystery solved. Now the rest of the book is going to be about the, ramifications, the follow-up of what's going to happen now that this revelation has been made. Like, what's going to happen now? So to me, I thought the mystery was sort of solved halfway through the novel, but then it turned out not to be that case. So, and there were more twists along the way that I myself had not anticipated. So.
Next, we have from Melinda. Has writing this book changed you in any way that surprised you?
Oh, what a great question. I love that. I mean, certainly it's changed me in the sense that I think of myself as somebody who's not very patient and who doesn't sort of stick with things long term. So I've had 5 careers. I was a lawyer, and then I was a management consultant, and then I was an entrepreneur. And so I just sort of like go from job to job, finding something that trying to find something that I love. So I think the fact that I was able to stick with the one thing, not just even like a career, like writing, which I've now been at for a long time. But, the fact that I was able to sort of stick with the writing a novel, which for me is a very, very lengthy process, not just the first draft, which took like 2.5 years, but, revising over and over and over again over a course number of years, and, the publication process and all of that sort of stuff. So sticking with one thing, which has been really hard for me in my life. So that's been a good area of growth for me personally. And then I think from a thematic perspective, I do think that one thing that I didn't really think that I didn't intend to write about, but that has really come out and surprised me after the book was published, is that just how much this issue of the dispelling this myth of the good mother has really seemed to resonate with people. So that's been really interesting for me, and it's been really rewarding for me to see that does, really resonate with people, and how much I think people really do crave seeing what's really true about people, even if that's a harsh side. It's not completely pleasant to see some of these mothers having these, really shameful thoughts about their children, about being mothers, about each other as friends, all of that sort of stuff. And yet there was something about that really seemed to sort of resonate with people in a raw way. And that's been really interesting and heartening for me to see that even though it's not particularly pleasant, people have still really enjoyed that.
And then looks like we have one final question. It's from Dr. Eck. They ask, have you shared your novel with university students? And if so, how do they respond to it?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love that. Yes, I have, with university students and also with high school students as well. So I have, and in fact, actually, I feel like in some ways, they're the most avid readers. There's a passion to, I think, the really young groups that I have. I've spoken at high schools. I've spoken at colleges. And I've also done some like law schools and, so some more recent graduate types of events, alumni events featuring really, really young people in their early 20s or, mid 20s. And I feel like the one thing that I've gotten from a lot of them has been, there's been a lot more focus on less than I thought on the mystery element and the sort of the whodunit element, and more on the experience of the family and the family dynamics, and how much the daughter mother relationship not only hurt the daughter, but also the mother or the father, you know, and thinking about sort of that. So I don't know if it's that they're thinking a little more about sort of their own role in their families, you know, but it seems like I've had some really amazing conversations with them, with those groups. And not to mention, I have to say, I think I have to say my favorite event of all time. It was this really interesting, fun event that was unusual. Last year in Savannah, outside high school invited me to come speak to them when I was at the Savannah Book Festival, and it was a high school right outside Savannah. And when I went in, they surprised me. This high school, they had a mock trial. And so I walked in, and they were so giddy about it. They were like, "Oh, we can't wait to surprise you." And we walked in, and it was like quiet. Court is in session. And I was like, "What is happening?" And they had their teachers in robes. So like there was a teacher who was in a judicial robe acting as the judge with, you know, with all of the props that you would have, and they had a witness box of their honor students, and they had like a huge, you know, jury box, and it was just really, really wonderful. And they threw this entire like huge event for me, and it was just so special. So it's on my Instagram page, that whole thing. If you and Angie Kim Ask on Instagram, if you want to see it, it was just so special. So I feel like, you know, the students do things like that as well, that are, you know, that can be so fun.
Okay. Ted, did you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, Angie, thank you for a very interesting trip through your life and how it led to this book and the various topics we talked about in the book. And I want to ask you one last question.
Sure.
I did an interview on a kid's book called Amina's Voice. It was about a Pakistani immigrant story. But Amina's best friend is Korean named Sujin. And she's about to get American citizenship. And she's talking about how she wants to change her name to an American name. Now, we know you as Angie. I'm thinking maybe you weren't always Angie. What was your name?
Yeah, it was Kim Soo-yeon. So Soo-yeon was my Korean name. And I think you spell it like the Americanized way of saying it would be Soo-yeon. And then, you know, my last name in Korean, you know, Kim is like the most popular, you know, Korean name. It's like Smith and Jones combined or something, and Johnson combined or something. And it's actually not Kim in Korean, it's Kim. So my name was Kim Soo-yeon, and I actually have an essay that I wrote about how that 14-hour flight from Seoul to or Incheon to I came through Chicago, but how that flight, I entered that airplane as Kim Soo-yeon and came out as Angela Kim, and how strange that was, and then how much I grew to hate the name Angela, because I associate the name Angela with the middle school recent immigrant version of me, who was bullied and made fun of, and, you know, like I didn't understand anything and I felt so stupid and all of that. So to this day, I have sort of an allergic reaction to Angela, even though that's my, you know, formal name. That's in all of my legal, you know, my driver's license, my passport, everything. It's Angela Kim. And I'm just like, I can't stand Angela. Because I just, to this day, anybody says Angela, and I just think of that little girl who just didn't know anything and who just felt so embarrassed by everything that I did and said. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you so much. I really, really love this. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for the insightful questions. Thank you so much again for the amazing event from last year, which I loved so much. And thank you so much for supporting your local independent bookstore, hopefully, and your library.
Yes. We thank you all for joining us. For many more events like these, log on to library.carr.org. Have a great night.